My name is Jennifer Hayes, 35, an interior designer who carved out my own life in Tulsa, Oklahoma. One Tuesday night, my phone lit up with a text from my mom that froze me in place. Don't call. Don't come over. We're finished. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry and I didn't plead. I typed back just 2 words, got it? That was the end. All those years I'd poured my energy, my heart, and my money into them, covering mom's medical bills, pulling my brother out of debt, keeping their restaurant business alive, wiped away with a single message. I'd always been the outlier, the one who chose design over the family empire, the one they never thought measured up. But that text was the breaking point. I wasn't chasing after them anymore. By midnight, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, voicemails stacking up, texts flooding in. Mom's number flashed again and again. Then Brandon's, even Dad's. They were spiraling, and I knew why. I'd been their safety net for so long, and I had finally let go. What happened next shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Stay with me, because this is where everything unraveled. If you've ever been pushed aside by your own family, hit that like button, share your story in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next in this ride. Growing up in Tulsa, we looked like the picture of the American dream. My dad, a hometown legend, built a restaurant chain from a single diner. Mom left her banking career to stand behind him, keeping the home together and polishing the rough edges of his personality. Then there was Brandon, 4 years younger, the golden child, their chosen heir to carry on the legacy. And me, Jennifer Hayes, the one who dreamed of spaces, light, and color instead of menus and profit sheets. From the time I was little, Dad laid down the rules. The restaurants are our future, he'd say at the dinner table, voice full of authority. You'll learn the business, Jennifer. But I had no interest in grease-stained aprons or juggling ledgers. I wanted to design homes, places that made people feel alive. By high school, I was filling notebooks with floor plans, imagining warm living rooms and sleek offices. When I told Dad I wanted to study interior design, he laughed. That's a hobby, not a career, he said, sharp enough to slice me open. Mom said nothing, just looked away, already picking her side. At 17, I applied to a top art school in Chicago. The day that acceptance letter arrived, I was overjoyed. Dad's response crushed me. If you're not joining the restaurants, you're on your own, he told me, arms crossed. No tuition, no support. Mom nodded in agreement, her silence louder than anything. Brandon, just 13, smirked like he'd won. That night, I knew I was an outsider in my own family. Their favoritism toward him had already cut a permanent line between us. So I worked 2 jobs, waiting tables and tutoring to cover what scholarships didn't. Long nights, back-to-back shifts, and a mountain of student loans carried me through. Dad never once asked how I managed. Mom's rare, "I'm proud of you," felt hollow when she'd immediately turned to gush over Brandon's half-hearted stints at the restaurant. He could mess up and still be excused. One Christmas, home from college, Brandon forgot to lock one of the restaurants. A break-in cost thousands. Dad brushed it off, he's learning. Meanwhile, I got chewed out for missing a family dinner because I had to finish a design project. The gap between us only widened. Dad's attention was glued to Brandon, no matter how little he cared. Mom followed his lead, her warmth reserved for him. I tried to keep her close, weekend calls, sharing my sketches, but her replies were distracted, always circling back to Brandon's helping at the restaurant, like that was the greatest thing a child could do. I wanted to scream, "What about me?" But I swallowed it, hoping someday they'd see my worth. By the time I graduated, the distance was undeniable. I had built a reputation in Tulsa, designing boutique hotels and high-end homes. But at family gatherings, nothing about my career mattered. "When are you going to join us?" Dad would ask, dismissing everything I'd built. Brandon would make jokes about my fancy drawings, and Mom would smile without a word to defend me. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a wall. And I was on the outside. Looking back, those years set the stage for everything that came later. I kept trying to prove myself, to earn a place in their world. But the harder I tried, the clearer it became. They had already chosen Brandon, and I was just the spare part they never wanted. After art school, I poured everything into building my interior design career. Chicago had shown me how to dream big, to turn spaces into living narratives, not just decorated rooms. When I returned to Tulsa, I started on a smaller scale, remodeling neighborhood cafes, reshaping tight diners into warm, welcoming retreats. At 27, I landed my first breakthrough. A boutique hotel chain hired me to redesign their lobbies across Oklahoma, with clean layouts, soft textures, and hints of modern elegance. My style began drawing attention. Soon, fine dining spots and private homeowners sought me out. And my name, Jennifer Hayes, began circulating through local design blogs. By 30, I was signing six-figure contracts, earning recognition as Tulsa's go-to designer for high-end interiors. But at home, life told a different story. 5 years ago, my mom's health took a sharp turn. Doctors didn't soften the blow. Her treatment would run into the tens of thousands, if not more. Dad's restaurants were barely holding on with rising expenses, and insurance only brushed the surface. I didn't think twice. I sent money to cover hospital bills, specialists, prescriptions. "We'll pay you back," Dad said over the phone, his voice tight. I knew not to believe it. Mom's only reply was a short text. "Thank you, Jennifer." No call, no warmth. It hurt, but I reminded myself I was doing it for her health, not for their approval. Then came Brandon. My younger brother, barely in his late 20s, launched a food truck venture. It collapsed within months, leaving him buried in debt. Credit cards maxed out, and unable to meet his share of the restaurant expenses. One evening, Dad called with his usual businesslike tone. "Brandon needs help," as if it was my duty to step in. I wired $30,000 to erase his debts and another $20,000 to stabilize the restaurants. Not once did Brandon thank me. At a family barbecue, he even bragged about how he'd turned things around himself, as though my money hadn't kept him afloat. Dad patted him on the back, proud, while I stood in the background, unnoticed. And I kept giving. When a restaurant needed an expensive new walk-in fridge, I bought it. When Mom required treatment from a Dallas specialist, I covered the travel and appointments. Every time, I hoped they'd finally see me as more than a wallet. But family dinners always circled back to the restaurant, Brandon's potential, or Dad's grand plans. My own accomplishments barely got a passing word. Once, I shared a magazine spread featuring my hotel designs, thinking Mom might feel proud. She glanced at it and said, "That's nice, but Brandon's working so hard at the restaurant." I forced a smile, my chest aching. It wore me down. Whenever I called Mom just to talk, she shifted the conversation back to Brandon's new ideas or Dad's stress. Dad only phoned when money was short. "The restaurant's behind this month," he'd say, and I'd transfer funds, feeling more like a bank account than a daughter. Brandon, meanwhile, carried himself as though he was entitled to my success. "You're doing well, so why not help out?" he once shrugged, as if my years of work meant nothing. Looking back, I see how foolish I was, believing money would buy me their respect. Every wire, every payment was my way of trying to close the distance they'd created. But they took everything, hundreds of thousands, and gave back nothing, not even acknowledgement. The quiet hurt grew heavier with time, and I began wondering if I'd ever truly be enough for them. 5 years into my career, I pitched a daring idea to my family. My design business was flourishing, and I'd been building toward a bigger vision. A sustainable design firm specializing in eco-conscious materials for hotels and restaurants. It wasn't just a dream, it was backed by research. Proof of the growing demand for green interiors in Tulsa's hospitality scene. I needed investors, and for the first time, I thought maybe my family would finally see me as more than a hobbyist. I prepared slides, financial projections, and revenue forecasts, and invited them to meet at our family home. Standing in the dining room, my laptop open, presentation ready, I faced them. Dad sat at the head of the table, arms folded, his face unreadable. Mom busied herself with coffee, avoiding my eyes. Brandon slouched, scrolling through his phone, barely listening. His wife, Tara Hayes, sat quietly beside him, offering me a faint, sympathetic smile. I drew in a steady breath and began laying out my case. I explained how using sustainable materials could save money over time while appealing to clients who valued eco-friendly choices. This, I told them, could put Tulsa on the map. My voice stayed calm, even though nerves twisted inside me. I'm asking for a $200,000 investment, I said. I'll repay it with interest. Dad cut me off before I finished. A fantasy, he scoffed, leaning across the table. You think hotels care about reclaimed wood? They want cheap, not some fancy experiment. His words landed like a slap, but I pressed on, presenting data that proved client demand was shifting. Brandon gave a short laugh without even looking up. What a waste of money, he muttered. Why don't you stick to decorating houses? Heat rose in my face as I clenched my fists under the table. Months of work, dismissed without a thought. Mom stayed quiet, fussing with the napkins the way she always did when conflict stirred. I turned to her, desperate for some kind of backing. Mom, you've seen my work. You know I can make this happen. She hesitated, then finally said, It just seems risky. Jennifer. Restaurants are what we understand. Her words stung deeper than Dad's. After everything, paying for her treatments, keeping their business afloat, I was still the outsider. Tara's voice broke the silence, gentle but certain. I think it's a smart idea, she said, shooting a nervous glance at Brandon. Sustainability matters more than ever now. A flicker of hope rose in me, until Brandon shot her a look and she shrank back, silent again. Dad waved his hand to end the conversation. We're not throwing money at this, he said flatly. Brandon's working on a new restaurant site. That's where our focus is. Brandon leaned back with a smug grin, as if he'd just won a contest I hadn't realized I was competing in. I made one last attempt. This isn't charity, I said, my voice rising. It's an investment with a return. I've built my career from nothing. You know I can deliver. Dad only shook his head. You made your choice, Jennifer. Brandon chimed in, the family business comes first. If you actually pitched in at the restaurants, maybe we'd take you seriously. I wanted to scream. I'd poured hundreds of thousands into them, bailed them out time and again, and they still treated me like a kid sketching ideas in the corner. The air grew heavy, the room shrinking with their rejection. My hands trembled as I packed away my laptop. Tara caught my eye as I stood to leave, mouthing I'm sorry. But it didn't ease the sting. On the drive home, their words replayed in my head, each one carving deeper. I would never be enough. Dad always championed Brandon. Mom's silence, her loyalty tethered to his vision, was just as wounding. Even Tara, who clearly believed in me, couldn't find the courage to stand up for me. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the business plan I'd poured my soul into, just as I had poured everything into them. But their refusal wasn't really about money. It was about me. They didn't believe in me, and that cut deeper than I could admit. I didn't know it then, but that night marked the beginning of the end. One evening after another family dinner, the truth started to unravel. The dishes were cleared, and I stepped into the kitchen to grab my jacket before leaving. Tara lingered near the sink, twisting a dish towel between her fingers. She glanced around, then pulled me aside, her voice whispering. Jennifer, there's something you need to hear, she said, eyes flicking toward the dining room where Dad and Brandon sat talking. Brandon's been taking money from the restaurants. Thousands. That's why they're falling apart. My stomach dropped. I'd known the business was struggling, but I thought it was a whole picture. He's been skimming for years, she added, her voice trembling. I found receipts, hidden accounts. He's lied to your parents. I stood frozen, her words spinning in my head. Tara looked terrified, like she had just betrayed her husband. Before I could respond, Dad's raised his very hand against me. Quietly, I edged closer, staying out of sight behind him. His voice was sharp and directed. We need to finish it. Brandon's the only one holding this family together. Jennifer's off chasing her own game. She doesn't care about us. My chest tightened. Mom murmured something that couldn't catch me first, but she's given us so much. Dad cut her off. Money, not loyalty. Brandon is our legacy. The restaurants will take. The words knocked me right through. They were erasing me, cutting me out of the Years of covering mom's medical bills, bailing Brandon out, rescuing the restaurants, and they saw me as disloyal. I drove home in a haze, Tara's confession and Dad's voice echoing. Brandon's theft explained the missing cash, the late vendor payments I had covered. And still they chose him, rewarded him. The betrayal burned, but I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. Not yet. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. Don't call. Don't come over. We're done. The words landed like a blow. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. This wasn't just about the will anymore. It was personal. Mom, the one I'd always felt closest to, was cutting me off. I typed a quick got it and hit send before I could second guess myself. My finger hovered over the call button, but I stopped. No more chasing, no more begging. If they wanted me out, I'd give them exactly that. I opened my banking app and canceled every single payment I'd been covering. Mom's medical bills gone. Brandon's debts, no longer my problem. The restaurant utilities, cut off. Over $300,000 spent, countless hours sacrificed to hold their lives together, and they'd thrown it all back at me. Severing those ties felt like unloading a weight I'd carried for years. But it stung too. I wasn't just stopping the money. I was releasing the last bit of hope that they'd ever value me. As confirmation emails stacked up on my screen, I felt a tangled rush of anger and relief. Tara's warning replayed in my head. Brandon's theft, hidden for years. How long had they known? Had Mom and Dad protected him? Or were they truly in the dark? Either way, their choice was clear. They sided with him, not me. I thought about calling Tara for more, but held back. She'd already taken a risk confiding in me, and I didn't know where her loyalties lay. That night, I lay awake with Mom's text seared into my mind. We're done. It wasn't just a message. It was a statement. They'd chosen, and I wasn't on their side. But I wasn't the same girl desperate for their approval anymore. I'd built a life on my own. Now I'd protect it. Their betrayal had lit a fire in me, and I wasn't going to let it consume me. By midnight, my phone was buzzing nonstop. This call, voicemails, texts, Mom, they must have realized I'd cut them off. I didn't pick up. I sat on the couch watching the screen, each was twisting the knot in my chest tighter. After years of being their safety net, I'd finally pulled the plug, and they were spiraling. Brandon's first voicemail dripped with venom. You think you can just walk away? Jennifer? You're selfish, leaving us stranded like this. Selfish? I almost laughed. I'd paid his debts, kept the restaurants afloat, and he had the audacity to call me selfish. The next message was darker. You'll regret this. We'll take legal action if we have to. I deleted it, my hand steady though my pulse raced. Legal action for what? For cleaning up his chaos all these years? Then came Mom's texts, a flood of guilt trips. How could you do this to me, Jennifer? After everything I've endured, you're abandoning your own mother. Another read, I raised you better than this. I stared at those words, her attempt to twist the knife. She always knew how to tug at my heartstrings, how to remind me of the late-night talks I once thought were real. Now they felt like manipulation, not love. I refused to answer. I couldn't let her pull me back in. At 1 a.m., Dad called. I let it go to voicemail, his booming voice filling the speaker. Jennifer, you need to fix this. The restaurants can't survive without your help. You owe us that much. Owe them? I'd given more than $300,000, years of my life, only to be erased from the will, dismissed as if my career meant nothing, while they chose Brandon and his lies. I saved that voicemail not out of guilt, but as proof of who they really were. By morning, the barrage continued. Brandon texted, "You're tearing this family apart. This is on you." I could picture him pacing, pointing fingers everywhere, but at himself. Tara called once but didn't leave a message. Maybe she felt caught in the middle, knowing the truth about Brandon, but afraid to say more. Mom's next voicemail was softer, almost pleading. "Jennifer, please. We're family. You can't just turn your back on us." I wanted to believe her, but her first text, "We're done," still burned in my mind. Real family didn't disown you with a sentence. That afternoon, Dad called again. I picked up, thinking maybe, just maybe, he'd admit they were wrong. Instead, he went straight in. You're putting your mother's health at risk. Her treatments aren't cheap, and the restaurants are bleeding. You need to step up. Not a single word about the will, or Brandon's theft, or their betrayal. I gripped the phone, my voice calm but cold. I've stepped up for years, Dad. I'm done. He paused, then warned, You'll change your mind when you see what this does to us. I hung up, my resolve harder than ever. But the storm didn't stop. Brandon's next text was a threat. He'd expose me, whatever that was supposed to mean. He wrote, Everyone will know how you betrayed us. I just rolled my eyes. Betrayed them? After years of carrying their burdens? Then came another message, this time from Mom, wrapped in nostalgia. Remember when I helped you with your first drawings? She typed, I've always been there for you. But she hadn't. Not when I truly needed her to defend me. Not when they mocked my ambitions. I swallowed my words and stayed quiet back then. Every call, every text now was nothing more than a frantic attempt to drag me back into their dysfunction. But I finally saw it for what it was. They didn't want me. They wanted access to my bank account. I checked my balance, reassured by the cancellations. No more paying Mom's medical expenses. No more bailing Brandon out. No more rescuing Dad's failing restaurants. I'd poured years into trying to win their respect. But what they offered in return wasn't respect. It was control. And I was finished letting them have it. By week's end, their panic had only intensified. Messages stacked up, angry, begging, threatening. But I didn't falter. My decision wasn't fueled by anger, but by survival. I wasn't their ATM anymore. I was Jennifer Hayes, and I was done being their fallback plan. A week later, we met at a cafe in Tulsa. I'd agreed to one final talk, not to mend things, but to shut the door permanently. The tension in the room was heavy as I walked in and saw Dad, Mom, and Brandon waiting at a corner table. Tara was missing. She'd sent me an apology, admitting she couldn't handle the aftermath. I sat down, spine straight, resolve steady. I wasn't the same Jennifer who once begged for their approval. I began with the truth. I sold my sustainable design project, I said evenly. A national firm bought it for $1 million. Their eyes widened, but I didn't give them room to interrupt. I built it myself, from the ground up, without your help, despite your doubts. Dad's jaw clenched. Mom lowered her gaze. Brandon shifted in his seat. I leaned in closer. I gave you everything, my money, my time, my trust. And you threw it all away. You chose Brandon over me, even after he stole from you. I kept Tara's secret, never saying her name. Brandon's face flushed with anger. You're lying, he snapped. You're just bitter, trying to tear us apart. I didn't blink. The receipts don't lie, Brandon. I know exactly what you did. Mom covered her mouth with her hand, silent. Dad's voice cut sharp. You don't get to judge us. You abandoned the family business. I let out a bitter laugh. Abandoned? No, you pushed me out, Dad. You cut me from your will. Called me disloyal. Mom tried her usual soft-voiced plea. Jennifer, we're your family. You can't turn your back on us now. I held her gaze without flinching. You turned your back first, Mom. That text, we're done, that was your choice. She recoiled, eyes filling with tears, but I stayed firm. I'm finished being your safety net, I said. I deserve respect, not manipulation. If that's what it takes, then we're done. Brandon let out a laugh. You think you're above us? You'll come crawling back. I shook my head. No, Brandon. I won't. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping across the floor. This is the end. No more money. No more calls. No more second chances. Dad's expression turned cold. You'll regret this, Jennifer, he warned, echoing the same words Brandon had thrown at me just a week earlier. I didn't answer. I just walked out, the cafe door swinging shut behind me. My chest was heavy, but there was freedom in the weight. I didn't turn around. A year later, the fallout reached me through mutual acquaintances. The family's restaurants collapsed, unable to stay afloat without my help. Brandon landed in legal trouble, dragged into lawsuits as vendors uncovered his hidden accounts and years of theft. Mom and Dad withdrew from the world, their reputation and legacy reduced to ashes. I heard that Tara had finally left Brandon. choosing to start a new life somewhere else. I never contacted her. That chapter was closed for good. Meanwhile, I poured myself into my design firm. Selling my project gave me the means to grow, hiring a team, expanding overseas, working with clients around the globe. My life wasn't flawless, but it was mine, built on my choices, not theirs. I found strength in boundaries, in finally choosing myself over a family that had never chosen me. Their betrayal left scars, yes, but those wounds no longer define me. Looking back, I realized something essential. Respect begins with yourself. For years, I chased their approval, convinced I had to prove I was worthy. But no amount of sacrifice or money was ever going to change how they saw me. Setting limits wasn't selfish. It was survival. It was how I learned to recognize my own value and to walk away from those who couldn't. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Family should never be about enduring pain. It should be a bond that lifts you higher. And if it doesn't, you have every right to let it go. Thank you for walking through this story with me. It wasn't easy to share, but it's the truth. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw lines with family? Share your experience in the comments. Your stories matter, and I'm grateful for every one of you who listened.